Why am I wearing this thing that I made 2 years ago that's a turtleneck neckband without the rest of the shirt? Watch the video and find out. Hello and welcome back to Tasha Could Make That. Today I'm going to sew an elegant stretch knit turtleneck to wear under vintage dresses. I'm going to match up the body of a vintage inspired indie sewing pattern and some other stuff, but we'll get to that. Let's have some fun pattern hacking. Turtlenecks are an item that I really like when it's cold out, and they're great layering pieces and perfectly vintage or modern. Last year I sewed a jumper dress from a 1950s pattern, Advanced 7747, and I loved that way more than I was expecting. I'm about to make a similar one soon in this fabric, and you'll get to follow along me making that one. So I really wanted to sew a warm turtleneck to wear under those types of dresses. Arguably a bit of a boring sewing project, but a wardrobe staple for sure, and sewing knits go so fast so I can get on to the other exciting stuff. And it was either that or knit one, and knitting is not fast. And at this point I feel like I should say I could be using an actual turtleneck pattern. I'm sure I could have found a 60s or a 70s pattern easily, but did I take the easy way? Are you learning anything about me on this channel yet? Several years ago, I self-drafted a turtleneck pattern with cut-on sleeves, and I'm going to use that as my jumping off point for the neckline. I'm pretty sure that I traced that originally from a ready-to-wear turtleneck. So my idea is to use that with the bodice of the Jennifer Lauren gable top. It's a great 1950s style slash neck top. This is one of the few of them that I've made. So this pattern will be the bodice shape for my turtleneck. I'm going to use a fabric that I've used for 3 of my gable tops, including this one. It's a thick wool and rayon stretch machine washable knit. Unfortunately, it's not available anymore, but when it was, I bought it in several colors because when I love something, I want it in multiple colors. That's just how I roll. Ironically, I'm going to make it in white, but I wanted to make sure it would go with anything and make sure that it works out before I bust out another color. Here's the thing. I actually had this idea 2 years ago, so this is all what I think I was planning. At the time, I made this mock-up of the turtleneck neckband in the same type of fabric that I'm going to use today. But it was just this thing. No notes as to what I did, what pattern pieces I used to draft this. All I have is this thing that was sitting on a shelf for 2 years. You can actually see it in my sewing room tour video, exactly where it sat until about a week ago. And now that I'm finally sitting down to make this project, I guess I have to figure out what I did. I'm sure I thought I would remember. So I don't know where this is all going, but I'm going to sew a turtleneck by hacking together the gable top and I don't know, but let's find out. Here's where I'm at with this and where I think my Sherlock Holmes sleuthing skills have led me. So I have 3 patterns. I have the Jennifer Lauren gable top, I have the Tilly and the Buttons Agnes top, and then I have a self-drafted turtleneck that I made several years ago that I mentioned. So I made this a couple years ago and I wasn't sure where the pattern pieces were for whatever I concocted. And so I first started with the self-drafted turtleneck bag, and huzzah, that had some pattern pieces in it that said turtleneck mod, and then led me to believe that I had used Agnes as the basis for this. Now I'm frankly not exactly sure why, because the gable top is actually the pattern between the two that I've made far more frequently, and I've even made, as I said, 3 versions in this same wool rayon fabric. The Agnes top I haven't made for years, and I think I only made 1 or 2 versions. It's a little bit more fitted, so I can only think that I did that because the gable top has a slash neck top, and this just has a regular, neckline. And so that's what I was thinking. So I'm going to pull out all of these pieces and take a look, but here's where this is going to get a little sticky. The gable top has a 3/8 inch seam allowance. The Agnes top has a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And I found, while I didn't write it on this version, I found my original turtleneck and I wrote that I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance for the neckline because I have a hard time with knits kind of getting all that fabric under there and trimming with the serger too if I'm sewing it on my serger, so I like to just make that a 1/4 inch. So that's a lot of different seam allowances in a lot of different places. So I'm going to see if I can kind of figure out a way to put this all together. The other complicating factor with seam allowances is that this turtleneck measures 4 inches, so doubled, that'd be 8 inches tall for the pattern piece. Then if I had the 1/4 inch seam allowance as marked, that would be theoretically an 8.5 inch piece. This is way bigger than an 8.5 inch piece, this turtleneck band piece that I had in my envelope for these pieces. So I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. So I'm gonna have to fuss around with that as well, and hopefully all of these things will lead me to something that fits in the end. We shall see. This is the back piece of the gable top laying on top of the back piece of the Agnes top. And as you can see, these two are fairly similarly sized. There are some differences here. The arm size is a little bit different, and the width of the Agnes top is wider at the hips, but I know that the gable top fits really well, and so I'm going to use the bodice of this anyway. Plus, the other reason to use gable is that I like the way the sleeve fits a lot better, so it's worth it to me to do that instead of the Agnes pieces, which, I don't know, apparently 2 years ago I thought was a good idea, but I'm scrapping that now and I'm going to go with gable instead. So let's see how I can put this all together as I trace it. Okay, actually I stopped here because the more I thought about it as I was tracing the back, I realized that I wasn't really sure how I wanted to merge these two shoulder lines together. So I actually just put a piece of paper on top of both of them, and I sat there and I thought about it for a while, and a while longer, and a while longer, and I drew a ton of lines and eventually settled on something that I was happy with. So then I hit the ground running tracing my bodice pieces. I basically just traced everything from the gable bodice except for that neckline and shoulder seam that I worked out separately on a different piece of paper. I probably could have just omitted the Agnes piece underneath that. I just left it there because that's how I was doing it originally, but I probably didn't need to include that. So then I just traced everything and marked everything up on both the front and the back pieces. Then for the turtleneck band, I did actually go ahead and make that an 8.5 inch pattern piece, which matched the actual mock-up that I did 2 years ago because I wanted to make sure that it was the same height in the end, so I did correct that on my pattern piece. So here we go with all my pattern pieces. I'm using the original gable top sleeve pattern because I had no reason to change it, and then my modified back and front patterns and my turtleneck band. And away we go with cutting out the fabric. I spend a long time cutting fabric. I just feel like the more persnickety I am with it now, the better off I'll be in the end. So I love to cut on one layer, like I said in my first sewing a dress video. And I do it for knits to the extent that I'll fold things over if I have enough fabric, but I do it in sections like you can see me doing in this video. So I will try and figure out like how wide is the bodice? Okay, let me just cut this double layer exactly as wide as the bodice because it really maximizes the fabric. And I think I only had a couple of yards of this fabric. It is wide because it's a knit. I think it was maybe 58 inches wide, but this is the second project I've already gotten out of this. I also sewed a bolero, and I still have a teeny bit left over. I'm not really sure it is enough to do a full garment project, but yeah, I love to maximize the fabric whenever I can. I did all the pinning I could first, so the short side of the turtleneck band, and then pinning the shoulder seams. I actually basted the shoulders together with a long straight stitch on my sewing machine, and then did the same thing with the neckline. Since I kind of hack drafted this neckline together, I wanted to check the fit before I committed to actually sewing the seams. First things first though, I'm swapping out my bobbin casing. So here's the thing, I read a tip some time back that having a lower tension on your bobbin casing was helpful for sewing knits. And so I got a separate bobbin casing for my sewing machine, and those suckers are expensive, so I'm not really convinced that it necessarily helps. I think it's better if you use a twin needle. I don't love using twin needles. No matter what I do, I just don't have that great of a success with it. And so, does it really help having the lower tension casing? I'm not sure, but I bought it, and so I'm going to use it because it was expensive. Then time to sew the turtleneck seam and baste those shoulder seams. Then I can pin it all together and test the turtleneck. After pressing the turtleneck band into shape, I pinned it to the neckline to then baste it on the sewing machine and try it on to make sure it all actually went together well. I hadn't sewn with knits in a hot minute, so I fussed around with this for a while, trying to remember exactly what I'd do to make this easier on myself. It's not that it's difficult, but particularly with a thick fabric like I'm using, those layers can be a little annoying and kind of shift around a bit and catch on each other, so I took my time. Okay, so other than the fact that the fabric is shedding all over me because the seams aren't finished, I am very happy with this basted fit check. The turtleneck is a little taller than I remember the sample being, but I measured it and it's the same. But it's a nice height to fold it down, and I actually think I would probably more likely wear it this way. And so I'm gonna keep it. But something to keep in mind for the next time for me, I might, I could maybe shorten it an inch or something if I just wanted to stand up all the way to my neckline without slouching. But I'm happy with this, so I'm gonna undo all the basting and plow ahead. Also gonna pick a bunch of white fuzzies out of my hair too, apparently. So yeah, ripping out the basting for the neckline and the shoulders is a little bit annoying, but it's a whole lot less annoying than sewing an entire project and finding out the way I drafted the neckline was crappy, so it's absolutely worth my time to do it. I do most of the actual assembly of my stretch knit projects on my serger instead of on my sewing machine. You absolutely don't need to have a serger to sew knits, but since I do have one, that's my preferred way to do it. And it's hard to tell in this clip, but I'm sewing in a 1/4 inch wide clear elastic into the shoulder seams as I assemble them to help prevent them from stretching out. It's a great tip I picked up from sewing stretch projects. Remember when I said the fabric is thick? This is the turtleneck band seam and the neckline seam. It's like a wool sandwich. After pinning the turtleneck band to the neckline for real this time, I actually basted one more time. I have a hard time with all those thick layers and having them shift around a little bit, so the best way to prevent that is to baste first. I often do this by hand, but sometimes I do it by machine. It does mean I'll end up sewing over the basting thread with my serger, so I can't really get it back out again, but it's never stopped me. You can't see it anyway, and it makes sure that when I assemble this on my serger, I'm less likely to mess anything up. And when you're working on a machine with a knife, that's really important. One of the things I do early on is I prep the hems by folding up the seam allowance. I just find it makes it a lot easier to sew later when I just have to pin them up, particularly on the sleeves since they're so narrow. I do this on wovens too if I'm doing a narrow hem on a sleeve. One of my favorite things about sewing with knits is that you get to set the sleeves in with the bodice open. There's something that feels just so naughty about being able to do it this way, because after you sew the sleeve head seam, you get to sew the entire seam from the cuff to the hem. I just love that. Does that make me weird? Yeah, it probably makes me weird, but whatever, I do love it. Okay, yeah, I talked about that being weird, but before I actually sewed those side seams, I danced around with my shirt because I thought it looked like a ghost. I mean, wouldn't you? So I just need to pin that long seam from the cuff to the hem and then sew it on my serger. As I pin, you can kind of see the crease lines from pressing up the hems earlier, just to make things easier on myself later. And then I sew those seams on the serger. Just a quick zip down the side and it's off to press them. I know some people don't bother pressing stretch knits, but I always press my seams to lock the stitches into place, and I like to think that even in knits, it gives the seams a little bit of a memory as to where to fall. I think that's probably just me humoring myself, but I'm okay with that. Here's where I'm going to just go ahead and do what you should theoretically avoid needing to do. I don't get too bent out of shape about the beginning and ending of my seams when I sew knits on my serger. I often get those little bits of fabric where one piece didn't grab the other at the same rate. I think that might be called dog ears. There are tips to avoid this and play with tension, and honestly, I just cut the things off. Who cares? Never bothered me before, and I'm not starting now. Almost done here. It always surprises me how fast it is to sew with knits when I haven't done it in a while. One of the last steps is I serge the raw edges of the fabric on the hem and sleeves before sewing those hems. This isn't something I technically need to do with knits, but this fabric frays and sheds a lot, as you saw from my hair, so I need to finish the raw edges. I press the serged raw edges that I just did, since otherwise they tend to be a little wavy. And then the last step before sewing the hems with a zigzag stitch is folding them up and pinning. Since I pre-pressed those hems earlier on, that's easy. I know some people would probably do this without pins, but I like to pin and I feel like I have more control that way. So even with the creases that I made to guide me, I do pin these hems before I'm off to sew them. And then I just have to sew the hem on the body and the sleeves. I always find hemming sleeves annoying since the opening is so small, but putting them inside out instead of trying to shove them around the free arm of my sewing machine is a lot easier. And I'm done! And here's my simple, elegant turtleneck. I'm really happy with how this project turned out, and I definitely need to make more of these. It's such a great vintage look on its own or layered under a dress. I might make a narrow shoulder adjustment in the future since I think I could use that, and I also think I could stand to lower the front neckline about a ½ inch or so too, as it pulls a little bit, but just minor things to sort out in a future version. You'll see this turtleneck again soon when I walk through sewing the jumper dress that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more vintage sewing fun soon. Bye!